Welcome to the space between heaven on earth. This is a companion podcast to Awakening Heaven on Earth, created as a space for reflection, conversation, and lived experience. Here, we enter the pause between knowing and becoming, between insight and embodiment, between heaven and earth. These conversations are not about answers or conclusions. They are about presence, about listening, about reasoning together, about meeting one another honestly in the unfolding journey of awakening. I'm your host, Jeffrey Aylor. Again, welcome and thank you for entering the space between with us.
Welcome to this episode of The Space Between. In our most recent conversations, we've been expanding the circle of unity. And today we begin, we started this conversation within ourselves, bringing together all the divided parts that are within us, and then into our relationships, our families, our communities. And today we're going to expand that circle out even further into the different systems that impact and shape our lives. So this episode is called Rebuilding with Love, Unity in Systems. Because systems don't appear from nowhere. They're created by us. They reflect our values. They reflect our assumptions, our understanding of who we are. And if systems created from separation can cause harm, then systems that are created from unity and love can bring healing. So with that in mind, we're going to start off with a simple question for each one of you. And this morning, I want to welcome Purna, Devi, and Joe Dermody with us this morning in our conversation. It's always great to have the two of you here to have these wonderful in-depth discussions around the topic that we're going to be sharing this week in our Awakening Heaven on Earth podcast. So when you look at the world today, what systems do you feel are inviting us into transformation? Not because they're bad, but because we are growing beyond the consciousness or the minds that created them.
I think throughout history, we have seen the collapse of large systems, right? And the transformation of these systems. And I think what we are seeing is really another historic moment. We've heard the term, and maybe you haven't heard the term, of late stage capitalism. So we are now in our government systems, at least here in America, right? We are profit over people. And the capitalistic society, these systems are built on profit, on the dollar, on money. And I think that there is a transformation happening. There's a shift happening away from putting the dollar over the human being. And I hope, right, that this collapse, this fall of Rome, if you will, that we're seeing is because the human heart is rising beyond the greed and the consumption and the capitalistic ways that we've been under for some time.
I think that going along those same lines, just the systems that do oppress the people, right? The work systems of the manager versus employees, the us versus them systems, the insiders versus outsiders systems, those systems that increase oppression. And I think the people are just feeling it more now. And with the popularity, I guess, of the social media and the ability to share these thoughts more easily, I think it's just hitting a point now where we are able to just talk about it more. I think awakening and this transformation is just happening easier. And we're hitting that point where it's going to happen faster.
I really think that one of the reasons that this work has come to me and to us is because there is a great awakening coming in the world. The energy of the earth is rising. I think the energy of people is going to rise. And many of these systems were built based on suppressing and keeping people at a very low frequency in order to control. Now, the system of control may vary from system to system, but the intent is the same. And that is to have power over, as Purna has said many times, with the divine feminine, power over, which is the divine is the masculine, versus the divine feminine, which is power with. And I truly believe people are going to become frustrated with hierarchy. And hierarchy is an example, typically, of a system that's designed to benefit a few at the expense of the many. And I do think that people are starting to see that, and they're starting to recognize that they're being taken advantage of, whether the system is a government system, a business system, an education system, a healthcare system. It doesn't matter what the system is. The general purpose of what that system is doing is to benefit few at the expense of many. And I think this is I often think of the different revolutions that have occurred throughout history. You think of the French Revolution, you think of the American Revolution, you think of any number of revolutions that you can go back in history and study, and most all of them began with the masses being completely fed up with the fact that there was a handful of people in control of the majority of the money, of all the resources, the land, and they lorded over people. So I think, unfortunately, I think a lot of people have given that power over willingly. And there are plenty of people out there who are willing to take that power from you. So I don't want to make this a one-way discussion, because I do think there are people that are born to lead. They just have those capabilities and characteristics to lead. But the question is, what is the intention behind the leadership? What's the intention behind the decisions they make? Is it to do something that is beneficial for the common good, or is it to take and to consume and to be selfish? So with that in mind, there you go. We just laid a really great foundation for this discussion. So much like our last few episodes, we're going to break this topic down into different sections. In this first section, we want to talk about systems reflect consciousness. They reflect how we think. So it's easy to see a system as something that's outside of us. It's, again, the concept of separation versus unity. This system is outside of me. I am a victim in some cases, or I am a benefactor of that system, but the system is outside of me. It's something that they created, right? This whole mindset of they did it. I always love when someone says to me, well, they, and I say, well, who is they? Who is they? Are you they? Because, I need to know who they are in order to really understand this conversation. But, systems really are the collective expression of human choice. We create these systems, and we allow the systems to be created. So with that in mind, this is going to be our first set of questions this morning. So let's start with this one. Have you ever experienced a system that felt deeply human, supportive, and very aligned?
It's a good question because I immediately want to say the spiritual community, but I will be very honest. I stepped away from the yoga industry, right? The Mick Yogaville, as some folks call it, because it lacked diversity. There was a great deal of cultural appropriation and a whitewashing and an energy of, again, this capitalistic, consumeristic drive behind and a reduction of what yoga truly was. So in my heart, I want to say yes, the yoga community, the spiritual community. However, I did not find that in that space. So one thing I did, I think, as this rogue yogi who used to own a studio here in the city, was I ventured off on my own. I thought, if it doesn't exist, then build it. And so one thing that I have heard time and time again from my students and my clients and folks in the communities that I've created over the years is that there's a diversity, there's a welcoming, there's a real raw humanity that exists where folks can lay down their performative aspects that they felt judged in other spiritual spaces. And so again, I think it's an interesting question and an interesting conversation, because we would typically think of religious circles or spiritual circles or healing arts circles as a place where one could lay down the mask and feel safe and feel a part of, in an equitable way. And that just isn't my experience. So I think there's still a need to create more of these spaces, at least in the small little, microcosm that I come from.
I think it's also a good question. And I think I've experienced some of these, but not on an overall scale. So I think you find these systems, and it's kind of weird because you think of a system as an overall, it's hard to explain it. So a system is the
way
idea
that
things
it has
work,
to be
right?
Large, right?
Right. Yeah, that's how most people think of it. But really, it can be the way things work, even on a small scale, right? Anything that you're creating, it can be with a small portion of the population, can be a small sample of a bigger macrocosm, right? If you take it micro. So it can still be a small portion of this. I have seen, for instance, in our work environment, right? Our system, our team is using a system, and it is fantastic, and it's very human based. Not every quality team using a system functions the same way that ours does. However, ours is very human based, and it's fantastic. I have been in other work environments or other restaurants even, right? So we go to an Indian restaurant quite often that's also family owned, and I think that it works very well too. I've been to other restaurants like that. As a whole, I'm not sure that the restaurant system works great, but there's small pockets of individual restaurants that I think work very well. I think you find small pockets all over the place that work really well. It's just how they're run, how they're operated, what their intention is. And I think that is a lot of what we're talking about here. I think
It's interesting because I agree with both of you. One of the things that I have found in my experience is that as things get bigger, they tend to become much more bureaucratic. They tend to become much more power driven. And then people, start seeking position within that power. And all of a sudden, what started out as a great principle on which that system was built has been lost. They've lost focus. I truly think that the way for this to work is for us to have many small systems that work together in a common way, but they are allowed to function independent in many cases of each other, because it's when that power starts to come together, or the money starts to come together, or some of the fundamental things that tend to cause corruption within a system, that it loses its focus. I think I've really enjoyed this little system that we're building here. And I think it's deeply human. I think you've heard that in our conversations, and I think you've heard the support we provide each other. And that, even though we come from so many different backgrounds and perspectives, we still, I think, are quite aligned in general on the intent behind the information that we're sharing with people. And we're not telling someone, oh, well, what we're saying is right and what you say is wrong. It's just, hey, have you thought about this? Consider this, and let's talk about it, because you may persuade me in your position and understanding, because you may see something or understand something I don't. So yeah, I have experienced systems that are deeply human and supportive and aligned, but they tend to be small, and they tend to be local, and in many cases, they lose that when they start getting too big. That's just my experience so far. So have you ever been in a system or experienced a system where really good people are limited by the very structure of the system itself?
This makes me think of a conversation I had with my Swami, my guru, who is now 63 years old, a Serbian man, a Serbian refugee who found the yogic ashram, right? And was part of the organization and ended up being head of the organization for many years. And he said to me, Purna Devi, the higher up you go in any organization, the more you confront ego, your own and others. And the easier it is to hide. And like you said, there are limitations. So are the limitations built in the system? Are the limitations reflected onto the projection screen of the system based in the egos of those at the top? Like you said, who are they? Right? They are the ones that are in the leadership positions. And so I think that any organization's limitations are going to be reflections of the individual's limitations of those who are running it. And I think that a lot of folks that are in power positions, and I might say something that offends some folks, but the majority of folks in leadership positions lack diversity. They're older white men, right? And this is just the reality of these supremacist patriarchal systems that we have found ourselves subject to and building from. And the wisest organizers, I believe, are those who recognize the benefit of equity, the benefit of diversity, the benefit of not being the smartest person in the room, the benefit of not leading from the ego, and from having that round table where other voices that are different than yours. And my son is a white kid, right? He's a handsome, intelligent, artistic, creative white person. And I've told him, I said, son, there are going to be many doors that open for you simply because you're an attractive white male. And I pray to God that you hold those doors open for others that don't look like you and don't think like you. And that when you find yourself in a position of power, because you probably will, you're a leader, that you hold spaces and help elevate in equity those who don't have the privilege that you were born into. I'll get off my soapbox now.
I love it. You know where that, by the way, I have to tell this story. Do you know where that comes from? The term "get on your soapbox."
Tell us.
This is fun.
Please.
In Hyde Park in the city of London, there is an area in the park where people are allowed to congregate publicly, and they're allowed to state their individual beliefs and feelings about a topic. But to do it, they have to get up on a soapbox to do it. And that's where that term came from. Yeah, I just think about that because I've walked past that area in London, and there are people there. They're on a box up talking about whatever they want to talk about. Yeah. So yeah, there is a purpose behind that saying. So
beautiful.
I love that too, that you have to stand up so that you can be seen and you're not yelling from,
anonymity.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Wish that happened more today, right? You can't do that and be the keyboard warrior. Yeah. But anyway, so I want to answer the question. I think that in modern medicine, so I think that there's a lot of really good ethical, moral doctors that are wanting to do the right thing, wanting to be able to heal, and they can't because they're locked behind bureaucracy. They're locked behind a system that will not allow them to heal the way that they could or feel that they should. And I've seen that a lot.
Yeah, good examples. There's even scripture, I believe, in the Christian religion that teaches that, the race is not to the wise, it's not to the strong, it's not to the wealthy necessarily. There are, and there's an art to maintaining, and controlling power. And when systems do that, they tend to promote the people that are willing to sell their soul for the purpose of gaining that power and being brought into that leadership circle, which is very small. And, people in positions of power within a system don't like independent thinkers. They don't like people that are actually more intelligent than they are. They don't like people that have abilities that exceed theirs. So in order to do that, they have to continue to suppress them, and they have to marginalize them, or they have to do something that destroys character or destroys their integrity publicly. You can go off into all kinds of conspiracy theories at this point. There are actually groups that believe that the majority of the world is controlled by a very small number of people, a shadow government, a shadow organization. You've probably read books or heard about them. You have the Illuminati, which is a concept of, a very small group of people with a significant amount of power and influence that are really behind the scenes. They don't want to be open and public about what they're doing and how they're manipulating things and systems in the world, whether it's the medical system you're talking about, Joe, whether it's a spiritual system, because I can tell you, I believe in many cases, they have influence in churches, they have influence in any number of businesses, the media, you name it, and it's all designed for control. And only those people who are willing to pay the price in some cases will they allow in. And those that are able to challenge that, you think of the doctors that they know that our system is not healthcare, it's sick care. And they want to do something that makes it healthcare and preventative. But you know what? It's hard to make money if people are healthy in a system like that. I think of our food system. And there are people out there who know that what we're doing is not healthy for us. So anyway, yes, I do believe, and I have personally business systems that I've been in where good people that have significant talent and ability are purposely, not, it is purposeful that they're limited by the structure itself because they would challenge the current leadership. So there again, we start getting into, and I think that's what Jesus experienced if you follow his story. And I think that's what many of the enlightened masters that struggled and suffered. You think of Gandhi and others that, they challenged that concept of leadership. And you can see that what the people in power were willing to do when they're challenged like that. So I think this is an important one, especially in the world and in the environment we live in today. How do we separate criticizing a system from blaming the people inside it?
I think that criticism and blame can often feel the same, again, depending on the ego of those that are holding space for the critique. And I think that it's not enough to just blame those who are inside it. And like you've said, throughout this podcast today, we are the systems. We have built these systems, and a lot of people feel powerless. And so all they have is to complain and to blame and to throw stones. And I think that a more effective way to criticize is to begin to amass in numbers folks that believe in the same way you do, so that we can begin to find a greater level of power in our voice, right? If there's really something going on, then it seems like we are able to do more critical benefit, right? We can be heard better when it's not just one person blaming and criticizing, but rather many of us are critiquing in the same way. And I think it is important to recognize that the systems aren't built from just one person. So for me to criticize just one person is not really going to be that effective, but rather I like to speak in generalities, right? And so we can speak to the general dis-ease of the system. And that doesn't mean that there aren't those individual ants moving in the ant farm, right? That are wreaking havoc. And sometimes, individuals do need to be called out. I don't think that that's a bad thing. I do think, though, that just throwing stones and blowing hot smoke, I think, it's not really effective, and it tends to just decrease the health of the person speaking. And so I think to be effective, we have to be of healthy mind and have other people to support us in that critique, and then find a valuable way, get involved in the system, go to the meetings, write the letters, make the calls, do the things that are more effective than just, for example, those folks that go in the echo chamber of social media and just go off with their opinion and then just feed into the cesspool of negativity that just turns into this vacuum of disease. And now I'm contributing to it. I'm not really benefiting in any way the cause that I initially felt really passionate about.
It comes from everything that we've been talking to up to this point in all of these podcasts. It's remembering that we are all one, right? It's that unity. It is come at this from empathy, come at this remembering that we're all in this together. Remember that the systems aren't just miraculously put into place by nobody, that we as a people, as a whole, as one, created these systems. And then also remember, something I've been saying for a long time here, that, be hard on the problems together. So don't focus on the people. A lot of times, and Jeff, you've told me this, bad systems, will
Bad systems
destroy
will eat good people.
That's right. Every time.
Time.
So it's not the people's fault. Work with the people to fix the bad problems, the bad systems, and be hard on the problems and easy on the people. Sit at the same side of the table to work, together against the problems, the systems, the issues, whatever it is that we're working on. So we can do this, and we'll get to a better place by working together.
Well, and in many cases, we have to stop and allow some space between, right? When we come into contact with either a system or people within a system that maybe challenges where we currently are in our understanding. I give you a couple of very specific examples. First of all, as I've kind of deconstructed my Christian experience, it's very easy for someone doing that to all of a sudden talk about other, Christian people as though there's something bad or wrong. Well, wait a minute. I just came from that. So if I'm talking about them, I'm talking about myself, because quite honestly, I was there. I've been there. I understand exactly why they think and feel the way they do. And I know that they are in their experience, that's where they are. And that is okay. It's okay. I have to let them be okay, because if they aren't okay, I wasn't okay at that point. I think of this in conversations around politics with people. It amazes me how similar, when you start getting into a conversation with someone who claims to be an extreme conservative versus someone who claims to be extremely liberal, the fact is that when I'm in a conversation with either one of them, they sound almost exactly the same. The way that they attack the other folks, the way that they don't consider that maybe the circumstances in which they live is so different, that maybe in that particular environment, this particular philosophy is more appropriate. It is more effective for them, given the things they deal with. And so we think everyone should think the way we think. And when we come against people, or we come in contact with people that are within a system of belief, a system of that provides service or provides whatever, again, it's not the people in it. In many cases, to Joe's point, a bad system is going to consume people. It will consume good people. I've seen it. You put good people in a bad system and they'll perform poorly. It just happens. And then yet it's easy to blame the people because you can see them where you can't actually see the underlying system that is affecting them. And, this is where the concept of systems thinking is so important to be able to grasp. A lot of people are not aware that these systems, it's like talking about a system is like talking about spirit. Well, wait a minute. You can't see it. It manifests evidentially. You just can't see the system itself. So anyway, I think that I love that question, because we have got to get out of a critical, and that word criticizing a system, I could replace it with judging, being judgmental versus using discernment and using intelligence to question and logic. And so anyway, I do think that there is a way for us to change the tone and nature of our communication with people, and it will change the response, stimulus and response that we get. So let's move into this next section of questions around how do we change without creating more division? This is one I really think is important. How the more I awaken and the more I see things I couldn't see before, honestly, there is more opportunity to have division than there is before I was awakened. So what a conundrum, we can get ourselves in. So again, one of the big challenges of transformation is that we often fight separation with more separation. And that doesn't work. That doesn't work. You can't heal separation through separation. So when we identify enemies instead of people to work with and heal, we're not going to create the right healing pattern that we're looking for. So based on that, how do we work together toward change without falling into anger and judgment and this us versus them that Joe talked about?
This reminds me of a quote by Ram Dass that we're all just walking each other home. And again, it's so easy to take the posture of the other when, Swami Satchidananda said also, when you come across those whose values oppose your own, right? They help remind you what to cultivate in yourself. But if I am in an organization where I'm attempting to create change and not more division, how do I begin to work with those people whose values oppose my own when there's such a fissure within the system already? And I think it takes a really special type of leader. And I think that we don't see them come around too often that can speak to that bipartisan, that middle ground, right? The space between. I'm pulling all of these quotes now, but Rumi said, right, between the ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there's a field, and I'll meet you there. And so is there a space between my ideas and your ideas? Is there a middle ground to be found? And we start there. I believe a lot differently than most of my family. And we have been estranged for many years. But when I was still in attempt to create harmony with these folks, there were certain areas that were just too touchy. We would become angry. We would become divisive. We would become judgmental. But I found that through deep levels of compassion and understanding and forgiveness and unconditional love, there were parts of them that I could connect to. And it wasn't the easiest thing always, because that division, that judgment, can cloud the best of minds and the best of intentions. But I tried really hard from a loving space to meet them in that middle ground. I won't, since I mentioned that we were estranged, I think you can guess how effective that was, because it takes all parties, right? The one thing I cannot control is the free will of anyone else. And by gosh, that is a difficult thing to come to terms with, I believe, when we truly want change and we're well intended. But I think it requires a real compassionate middle space and patience with each other.
Well, and just in your example, even though you may have forgiven, to your point, I think you made in a few podcasts ago, forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It doesn't mean that you necessarily have reconciliation, but you still acknowledge that there's love and connection in spite of what looks to be like division. You truly are still connected, and you can influence and impact even from a distance with energy and with the things that you emit toward them.
I call that petitioning a higher court. So that is a really good, I think, side conversation to interject here, right? Because oftentimes I have felt incredibly frustrated when I couldn't impact a situation at face value on the ground level. And so I think prayer, meditation, sending energy, right?
Yep.
Sending love to those whose values oppose my own. Nishala Devi Joy tells a little story in her book, The Women's Heart-Centered Guide to the Yoga Sutras. And she had a monk that she had a lot of discrepancy with, which sounds kind of silly, right? But she's on this ashram and she is in relation to other people, and there are egos still involved, even in the spiritual space. And her teacher said to her, every time you see this person and come in contact with them, you put a lei of flowers, like they adorn, right, these statues of the Buddha and whatnot, and their gurus. You imagine in your mind's eye placing a lei of flowers around that enemy's neck. You bow down and kiss their feet as they are God themselves. And over time, she did this. And then that monk that had an issue with her came to her and said, I really didn't like you. And all of a sudden, now I'm actually looking forward to our interactions. And he had no idea that she had been doing this meditative prayer practice to connect to the God consciousness within him.
Well, many times I don't think we realize that what we're doing in a conversation with someone that we're in a disagreement with is potentially planting a seed, right? And we want the seed to yield a plant right away. We want to see evidence right away that what we've planted is growing. And I have to tell people all the time, well, we just planted a seed. Now, we're not going to dig it up every day to see if it's growing, because it has to stay in the ground and we can't see it. It's got things it needs to do and go through before it will start to show any evidence. But we're not patient enough to have a conversation and then allow that to blossom. And the other issue I think we bump up against is that we then want to control it. We can't detach from it and allow it to just take nature, let nature and the universe, let God source take that and do the miracle. I think even in Christian scripture, it says, I, Paul, planted, Apollos watered, but God gives the increase, right? We have a work we do, but we have to recognize who plays what role in all that. And, sometimes we're just not patient. We're just not patient enough with people. That's a great example. And I do love this sidebar conversation. There's so many great directions that this can go.
I put, learn facilitation techniques. I think that would help a lot. And then learn to know yourself a little bit, because, you can do things like learn self-control, learn love, learn patience, learn forgiveness. For me, it was learn a little bit more about how not to anger so easily. I learned Reiki, which also helped me tremendously. So it's as within, so without. Learn it internally before you can, help other people and help yourself in those situations.
It's interesting because I see this concept of facilitation now. It's coming up over and over and over. And I didn't see this when we first started this work as a foundational skill that I think is going to become critical for us to be able to share with people. But it is. It really is. So a facilitator is the conscious, objective observer. A facilitator is a conscious, objective observer of conversation. They're not meant to be in the conversation. They're meant to observe it and help protect, in some cases, people from being inappropriately attacked or being left out of the conversation because they don't know how to enter the conversation. And I think this goes back to one of the questions we had about how is it that some people don't get recognized by leadership in a system. They get, an introverted person, I'm an introvert, and introverted people have a tendency to be looked at as being passive or being not assertive enough. And a lot of systems reward assertiveness versus critical thinking, right? So they will reward the extrovert who's very outgoing even though that person may not have the level of talent or thought leadership that an introverted person may have, and they will get overlooked or overshadowed in systems. So again, I find a lot of people, when I see people get angry over something, and think about all the different things so yesterday, here's another story. Yesterday, we were going to a concert downtown in Cincinnati, and we're down by the area there in the city called the Banks, which is where the Red Stadium is. It's where the Coliseum is, where the concert was going to be. And almost every time I'm in Cincinnati now, and there's a large gathering of people, there are a religious group there with signs and megaphones screaming at the people about how if they don't repent from their sins, they are going to die and they're going to burn in hell and they're going to suffer judgment from. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, why are you so angry? Your belief isn't something that is bringing you joy. It's bringing you anger. And it's causing you to be judgmental of everyone. Your assumption by coming there is that anybody who comes to this event is going to hell because they're not at a church, or they're not singing a hymn, or they're not doing something in your mind that you believe is evidence of godliness, right? And it creates, well, we know it, you don't know it, us versus them. And I'm sitting here looking at the signs and things, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, you're saying to me, yelling, screaming at me, that I'm going to go to hell if I don't believe that Jesus died, that God, his Father, sent him to die to save me from God. Because it's God who's bringing the judgment. Jesus, the Son, had to come to die for me, so that I could be saved from the God that they said loves me, who's going to send me to hell for all eternity. Now, I'm sorry, but I think that's pretty easy to figure out, that there's some confusion there.
And I wonder how effective their means are, right? Is how they're going about it effective? It seems like it would do the opposite. And then the irony that they're actually creating a hellscape, right? They're in that space creating the hell on earth, the opposite of what our intention is here, right? With that anger and that vitriol and that divisive, aggressive sort of judgment.
Well, I feel bad for them.
Of course.
Because again, as within, so without. All of that is projecting what they actually are feeling within themselves. And it's so what they believe is not bringing them comfort. It's not bringing them love and joy and peace. And there certainly isn't long suffering or patience in that approach. So anytime I see that, I feel sorry for them. I feel sad for them. And want to help them in some way. I really literally want to pull them aside and say, hey, let me ask you a question. What do you think you're really... The fact is that act really has nothing to do with their true concern about the people that they're talking to. It has everything to do with their fear that if they don't do these things, they will end up in the very place they're talking about. Because they're not doing enough. They're not doing all the things that they performing. You've talked about performing. People think they have to be performing all the time. And this is a performance. Yeah. So, and I see that in politics. I see that in religion, politics, you name it. This is why people say don't talk about religion and politics, because, people lose their mind. They literally lose their mind. So what does compassionate transformation look like? How do we do this in a compassionate way and not get carried away with those strong stimulus like that? That is a very strong stimulus that they're creating.
And the anger that they're projecting, you could respond very angrily to them. And then all of a sudden you're spiraling, and now you've got people hitting each other and hurting each other and doing. How do we do this compassionately? How do we approach transformation with compassion?
Well, I opened up, I've been pulling from Pieces Every Step. We just finished this, and I want to read this really short passage. And this section is called Waging Peace, because he's talking about the wars that are being waged, right? And how the earth is suffering. War, political, economic oppression, famine, pollution wreak havoc, right? He's talking about all of this. And he says many people are aware of the world's suffering. This is by Thich Nhat Hanh saying this, by the way. Their hearts are filled with compassion. They know what needs to be done. They engage in political, social, environmental work to try to change things. But after a period of intense involvement, they become discouraged if they lack the strength needed to sustain a life of action. Real strength is not in power, money, or weapons, but in deep inner peace. Practicing mindfulness in each moment of our daily lives, we can begin to cultivate our own inner peace. And so he says, really, the fruits of change come from within. We've been talking about it this entire conversation, right? It's micro and macro. And how can I be a facilitator, right? When you were talking about facilitation, when you two were speaking on it, I was thinking the facilitator is the embodiment of the space between. Right?
Totally.
So if I am to facilitate any type of compassionate transformation, I first must be the embodiment of it. Not to perform it. If I'm coming with fear, if I'm coming with anger, if I'm coming with bias, if I'm coming with that divisive mind space or heart space, I'm not going to hold the adequate space for transformation to happen naturally. It just won't, right? Because the container won't be built for the contents. It just won't happen.
And I'm just going to repeat basically what I said last time, right? It's you need to do it with empathy, with love, with learning all of this yourself first before you can help other people. Self-work. So be hard on the problems and soft on the people. It's the same thing. Be mindful of what you're saying. Don't push buttons. And stop and think before you speak. If people would just do that a little bit more often, man, we could resolve and not spark these conflicts and be at a better place in communication.
I mean, I really can't add much to what we've already said about this. If you've got to be compassionate to yourself and recognize that if you can't be kind and loving and forgiving of yourself, you're not going to be that way towards others. And I really do think it sounds so simple. This is the thing about most principles sound so simple, but boy, they're not easy. They're not easy when you're in a world that is significantly complex and you've got so many different ideas and thoughts and beliefs that are driving people's behavior. So let's go on into this next section of questions around healthcare and whole person well-being. One of the systems that many people are heavily focused on today is health. And I'll be honest, I've come in contact with people that they've almost turned health into religion. And they're just as judgmental, and they almost consider health things as moral issue versus, and so how do we
And then how do we move beyond just responding to an illness and getting, closer to supporting wholeness? How do we get, because I do think illness, again, is an outward expression in many cases of inward issues, illness that's within us. So, this is a case where, my son Joel, who is a pharmacist, and he's very passionate about prevention and true health care versus sick care, where he sees, food as medicine. And what shifts how we feel about this healthcare system, which is really not focused on health. It's focused on sickness, right? So how do we honor modern medicine while we expand this understanding of well-being in general?
I have a fun little story. So a few years ago, I got the shingles. And if anyone is listening, if you have had the shingles, it is hell on earth. It is the absolute worst pain I have ever felt in my entire life. It was so intense. And coming from the holistic space, I was such a brat because I was doing these oatmeal baths and I was doing all of these natural homeopathic remedies, and I was just making myself worse and worse and worse. And then finally, God spoke to me and woke me up and said, "You little, you know what? How dare you be so privileged and have access to modern healthcare? It is literally at your doorstep. You could literally walk out and drive 5 minutes to the doctor and receive, the antiviral, whatever you need from modern healthcare to help you. But you are so fixed on, and jaded, right, by the sick care industry. You're so jaded by it that when it actually would facilitate healing, you scoff at it as if you're too good to use it." And something shifted in me, and I thought, oh my gosh, right? There are people that are sick all over the world that don't have access to this modern healthcare. And I'm not one that abuses it, right? I grew up with my mother abusing pills and medications, and always there's a quick fix for whatever symptom that is arising in her human experience that she wants to sedate the root of, right? And so I became very, very jaded, and it's changed, right, the trajectory of my life toward holistic healing, energy healing that takes time, that holds space for you to become uncomfortable and find root causes of things. But I just wanted to share that funny story because, well, not so funny at the time, funny now, because it helped me realize that there is a space for both. We don't lean so heavily. I don't run to modern healthcare and modern science and modern medicine for everything, but there is a space for it because it came through the wisdom of the divine. And also, right, we recognize that Mother Earth has given us everything we need also. And if we're looking at preventative, yes, right? Medicines and herbs and the system of Ayurveda, for example, from India, the science of life, that translates as. And so we understand our personal disposition and we heal ourselves through our way of life, through our daily practices. Shingles was not a preventative situation. It was already in full-blown flare-up, and I need modern science to help me.
Right. Well, that's wisdom, right? At this point,
Hard-earned.
You're gaining wisdom.
Yeah.
So just, you're much more of an expert on this than I am, but, I'm learning, and I was always one that I had so many issues growing up, right? I was diabetic. I was overweight. I had plantar fasciitis. I had bad knees. I had allergies, both food and cats and pollen. I had joint pain. I had both eyes lasered on because of diabetic retinopathy. The list was on and on and on. I have a whole team of medical doctors, right? And all of this stuff, it was needed. I thought it was needed. It was things that I would just compound upon myself. And then I also learned that there's other ways to treat this too, right? Not everything, right? But there's other ways to treat these symptoms that I had. Self-healing, there's meditation, there's Reiki, there's energy, there's a lot of other ways that we can treat some of these things. Will it cure everything? Maybe, maybe not, but there's other ways to treat these. And now, through a combination of both, I am a much healthier person. I think the medicine, the science side was also given to us. We have learned all of these things, and we use those very effectively on a lot of things. And I don't think they should be discounted either. So I think that through a combination of both, society can really benefit. So I think it's just finding that right balance. I think also the system, though, is where we have some issues. And the system used correctly could really benefit humanity. And because it's out of whack right now, it's very limiting. It doesn't get given to enough of the population. For instance, insulin. Okay, if we didn't have access to insulin, I would have died decades ago. Okay, and I think that is something that was, developed and given away freely a long, long time ago. But because the system in place right now, it makes it more difficult to hand out to everybody that needs it. So there's certain things that you can do yourself, that you can learn yourself, that has been around for millennia, and we are just now remembering how to use these great gifts that were given to us. And I think that's going to be a game changer as well here coming up again. But also the science that we have learned that maybe is also that we're starting to remember and we've used for a very long time as well. Using them together is really, I think, where this awakening, I think, is really going to be a game changer. I'm looking forward to this. This is going to be amazing.
Well, there is prevention. There is a reactive and there's a proactive element
Absolutely.
to health, I believe. And I do think that there are significant gifts that have been given to us by God, by universe, by source, by earth to help prevent illness. But there was also gifts that have been given to help when illness does come. In response to that illness, to your point, Purna, you were talking about when you had shingles, it was already too late. Had you done something maybe that could have helped you prevent that, that's one thing. But when you have it, now you probably have to seek a different source to help you with it. And, there are people I know in the medical field. My very best friend from high school is a general surgeon. He's a medical doctor. And the things that he's able to do today is a gift. He has a gift. I could not do what he does. Not everyone has that gift given by the divine to be able to help people. Now, here's where I think things tend with systems, they tend to get derailed. There is a proverb in Christian teachings that says the love of money is the root of all evil. When we privatized for profit healthcare, at that point, you opened it up for corruption. You opened it up for, and it's exactly the same thing we've run up against with our food system. Our system of food, especially here in the United States, not that it's just the United States, but it's very, very obvious here that decisions made around how our food is created, how our food is managed, which if you believe as I have, like my son Joel has, and I have come to see, food is medicine. It is medicine. And unfortunately, the food system and the medical system, in many cases, collaborate with each other. The two largest lobbying groups in our government. And the money associated with it is immense. So I'm sorry, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to sit down and figure out, well, what has caused this? It's when you allow it to become a profit. We've talked about this early on. When it becomes something. Oh, and by the way, there's also a great proverb that says, there is no profit under the sun. There is no profit under the sun. If you're profiting at someone else's expense, right? And when you understand that, you take that mindset and you apply the actual principles. It's so funny because, unfortunately, here in the United States specifically, there's a lot of discussion right now around Christian nationalism and how this whole conversation is kind of focused on what the negative elements of that are creating in our government system, because now we're allowing that corruption to spread. It's like cancer. It's like a cancer spreading through one system and then the other. Cancer will metastasize. Well, this is a cancer, and it's metastasizing into multiple systems. Now that I say that, and you would think I have a very negative opinion of where the world's going to go or what's going to happen, but I do not, because I think that the all-knowing source is greater than all of that. And I do believe that there are people that have been sent into this world at this time to help transform our understanding of these things. And I think and hope that that's a part of what we're trying to do here. I don't hate medicine. There's another scripture in Christian teachings that says, actually, and also in Judaism, because it's in the Old Testament, is that a merry heart doeth good like a medicine. Now sit down and think about that one for just a second. If a merry heart is like a medicine and it's good, if a medicine isn't good, then a merry heart isn't good. So there is medicine that is good, and it does exactly what it's supposed to do, and it's helpful. So again, everything we do needs to be tempered and moderated. What I find is that it's extremes. When we get into the extremes, and this goes back to the Hermetic principle of polarity, when we get into any extreme, that's when you're going to create significant difficulty and friction and suffering. Suffering comes from that in so many different ways. Oh gosh, boy, I love this. See, what a great topic. So let's jump into the next section of questions around healing and human needs. And Purna, I really want to kind of focus this around some of your healing work and the work, Joe, that you're doing with Reiki as you grow and develop in that understanding and energy. What do you see people needing that many of our current systems are really struggling to provide? What are we missing? What are some of the key things?
Yeah, again, I think, the quote unquote healthcare system that's in place, I think we've touched on so many aspects of it that are not for actual healing. They sedate the symptoms, they don't get to the root cause, right? And I think that a lot of holistic healing takes into account the multiple avenues and the multiple layers of the being. If you think about the healthcare system, I've got a doctor for my foot, and I've got a doctor for my eye, and I've got a doctor for my knee, and I've got a right? And so what that system does inherently, it creates divisiveness. It creates division within the whole being system. It doesn't take into account the organism, the entire being. And a lot of these, again, I'm going to use air quotes, alternative therapies, alternative medicines that are actually just natural and historic medicines, right? That the modern system was birthed from. More natural systems take into account the multi-layered being that is human. So I think a lot of these new systems don't look at the mental connection to the body, the nervous system, and the way that stress and, these real basic systems, they affect the entire being. I don't like to use the word middle-aged. I'm 43. Am I middle-aged here? Maybe I am. I'm getting there. I'm getting there. Well, there's a conversation happening in women's circles now around perimenopause. And it's this buzzword that's happening because in the previous generations, no women talked about it. Joe and I have talked about it, right? Because I don't want to call out your wife. She's not here. But we have, all of a sudden, this physiological experience of these hormonal shifts and this dysregulation that's happening in our hormones is hitting this population of women, this generation of women, like a ton of bricks. And we didn't have any previous information about perimenopause. And so I saw Bill Gates' ex-wife just donated like millions and millions of dollars to women's healthcare research. And so I think, right, what's lacking in the system? The whole being, and also diversity, right? We need more information around women's health. We need more information around minority health. And I think that there's a lot that can be prevented by taking into account the whole being and not fragmenting us into the symptoms once something has proliferated within the physical, because by the time we get to the physical, it's moved through all of these subtle layers of the being. And perimenopause research. Sorry, Joe.
No, it's all good.
One more time, and then I'll step down off my London soapbox.
I think you're absolutely right, but I think we don't have the primary care doctors that we had in the past. The one doctor that was able to take all of the information from all the specialists, right? Pull it all in and then have that real honest conversation with you and say, okay, this is what I'm seeing from all of these specialists, and maybe this is what is going on. They are now just the person you see once a year to have your checkup, and that's all they're doing. They're not really pulling in all of that information and giving you that diagnosis, right? That they don't take the time to sit with you anymore and say, okay, I think this is really the root cause. They don't care about the root cause because, again, they're treating the symptoms and not trying to find the problem. And again, for those primary care doctors out there that really do care and are trying, I apologize, because I know some of you are out there really doing that. But I think the system's built so that you're not, right? Because a lot of their hands are tied and they have to go through this certain checklist before they're allowed to do anything. And I know this because I've talked with several of them. I was fortunate when I was diagnosed with diabetes that I had a primary care doctor that was allowed to do that. And he truly cared. And I had a lot of stuff going on and we had no clue at the time what was happening. And he took all of the symptoms that I had and said, let's try this, which was a little bit different. And that's where we found out. But
what you're describing, though, is really a microcosm of what's going on in the world in general. And that is that we divide the body into separate systems.
Yep.
And we specialize and focus on a specific system within the body.
Right.
And we do it sometimes at the exclusion of, well, what's the relationship of that system with the other systems within the body? I know an example of that would be my mother, who was diagnosed with multiple system atrophy, an MSA, which is kind of a rare diagnosis today. What we were seeing, though, with her is that she had an eye problem, and then she had a this problem, and she had a that problem. We thought all of them were individual and isolated, and she was seeing a specialist for each one of them. But what no one put together was the fact that it was her gray matter in her brain. It was neurological, that it was the gray matter in her brain that was deteriorating, and the connections within her brain were touching when they shouldn't have been, and creating short circuits and causing an issue with her eye, and then with her balance, and with her this, and her blood pressure, and all these things actually that appeared to be individual and independent of each other were actually all related to each other. I think of doctors of osteopathic medicine, DOs, who tend to have a much more holistic view of the person. They maybe that is a specific type of study that could be enhanced. But I agree. I think overall we've got to look at people as entire beings, recognizing that we're made up of multiple systems, but all the systems are designed to function together, and they're all related and connected. They're not disconnected from each other.
It's kind of funny, isn't it? They're all very siloized, right? So if you break down these silos and kind of get everybody talking again, kind of like a community, right?
It's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I think we also have to include in the conversation, how is one moving through their daily life? If you just prescribe me medicine, if you see all these symptoms, but you're not asking, how are you spending your day? Are you connecting in nature? Are you drinking water? What are you eating? What are you putting in your body, right? What am I consuming? And I would be remiss if I did not mention in this conversation the medical medium, Anthony William. So I used that example of shingles, right? And I finally got off my little high horse and went and saw the doctor to help, right, with shingles once it had gotten so bad and all of the holistic stuff didn't work. And then my Swami sent me from New York all of the medical medium books. And I started looking at liver detox for anger. And I started looking at the way I was eating and what I was drinking that was affecting my adrenals, that was affecting my nervous system, that was affecting the levels of different things in my body, right? And detoxing my system in a really intense way, in a really dedicated way. And I think that is key to this conversation, is that we centralize the patient and the client and not make them secondary to what they're doing, right? A lot of folks they feel like their health is something that's done to them instead of something that they are required to be responsible for.
And I also think that you don't take the mind and, honestly, I'm going to say, the spiritual well-being out of it, because I think a lot of things that's really affecting the population today is the ability to slow down, relax, and calm the mind, because you're seeing so much anxiety in the world today that is affecting so many things. And without that ability to stop, slow down, and remove some of that anxiety, I don't think you're going to get a lot of healing that needs to happen.
You make me think of one of the topics in our Living Heaven on Earth podcast that we have out, touches on the practice of fasting. And fasting can be not just food. People, when they think of fasting, they think you're just fasting from food. You can fast from many things that help you detox, right? You can fast from social media. You can fast from whatever, alcohol. You can fast from food. You can fast from that. You can fast from all kinds of things that will allow your system. In many cases, it's a reboot. We know from an information technology perspective, a lot of times all a computer really needs to do in order to get itself back to some sense of balance and function is to just be shut down and restarted and have a period where it just sits, and then you can, it's amazing how that fixes so many different things. And really, that's what fasting is. Fasting is a reboot. And, it's taught in every sacred tradition. It's not just taught in one, it's taught in every sacred tradition. Yet, I've had people, when I tell them, and I don't tell people because I don't want them to know I'm fasting in most cases. But if they know it or they find out about it, it's like, well, ooh, that could be dangerous. Well, no, quite honestly,
as
not
they're eating their
fasting.
cheeseburger from McDonald's.
Not fasting is dangerous, right? So the last section I want to go into here is really around education. You think of the education system, work systems and community systems. We've touched on community here recently, but also, and we periodically touch on work systems. But imagine our systems beginning from a different question. Instead of us saying, how do we produce more? Maybe the question we build a system on should be, how do we help people become whole? Right? How do we help people become whole? The education system is really today not designed to help children become whole. If anything, it's pushing them away from things that are really important and focusing them on things that are designed to benefit other systems from what you teach them. So what would education look like if its true purpose was to help each person discover their true gifts and to help develop those gifts and to bring these gifts out into the world?
I just had this conversation with my 16-year-old son who is learning. So I pulled him out of the public school system many years ago, and it was because I have a firm belief that the public school system teaches people how to be good factory workers, how to sit still for 8 hours a day, how to follow directions and not think freely necessarily, right? So we could do a whole other podcast about the public education system. So I pulled him out and I got him into a private school system that mirrors a great deal what the public school system is still built on. And we had this conversation, and he's realizing what most of us that have gone through the education system realizes, and that is a lot of what you learn is useless. And he's really, felt very distraught because he's in it right now. And he's like, I'm sitting for 8 hours a day and I'm regurgitating facts. And I'm not, he's a musician. He wants to play guitar and he wants to be creative and he wants to be around other creatives. And instead, he's not learning things that are going to help him later in life. Right. And so if education is where we start, if that's a system that we start to transform, then the children are learning about farming. They're learning about agriculture. They're learning about meditation at an early age. They're learning about their intuitive gifts at an early age. I think of the Montessori system. I taught yoga in Montessori for 4 years in Centerville. And it was so beautiful because they're not just sitting, in front of a computer, in front of a textbook all day, but rather they're understanding individual learning styles and adapting, and their smaller class sizes as well. And so there is so much reform that I think can happen, and that teaches, mental health at an early age, social health at an early age, compassion, right? All of these really important humanitarian skills beyond, what the Declaration of Independence said and what the guys in the white wigs were doing a couple hundred years ago. No offense to white wigs.
None taken.
As a silver-haired woman myself.
I think that it would it'd involve a lot more mentorships, and a lot more hands-on work, as well as everything else that you just said too, right? But in order to be more, it would have to be more individualization work, right? Because you have to take the individual into it. You can still do it in a broad type of teaching, because there's a lot of general stuff I think that still needs to get passed along in that education process. But you're going to communicate. There's going to be more communication, I think, that happens, especially as the kids would get a little bit older. There's a lot of stuff I think that is taught when the kids are younger. I think a lot of that should happen also with the parents. And I think the parents would need to be more involved in the education than they are currently. And that's not in every family. I know a lot of families and parents do a lot of teaching now. But I think that overall, for this to be effective, I think the parents would need to be, in general, a lot more involved in that education process. I think that, with me growing up, my community also did a lot of my education, and I'm not sure that happens a whole lot anymore either right now. So when I was growing up, I learned a lot of my personal skills from my community. There was a lot of times when my friends' parents would step up and correct me if I was doing something wrong. And I'm not sure if that happens as much as it did back then. And sometimes maybe that's not a great thing, but maybe it's just a generational situation. I'm not sure. So I don't know. I think that it's a sticky subject. But I think overall, as communities grow and get closer, as systems grow, get better, as communities, family, everything that we've been talking about here change, get better, grow closer, the education also will get better. Everything grows at its own pace here, and as one gets better, they're all going to get better.
Well, when you think of a system, most systems are made up of 5 basic components. You have a supplier, you have inputs that supplier provides to the system. The system then has a process that it uses to transform those inputs into something, an output, some outcome. And then there's a recipient of that outcome, who we call a customer, right? So when I look at education, I have to ask the question, who's the customer of that system? Who is the system designed to provide an outcome for, an output for? Purna, you were talking about how, I think today the system is really designed to create workers that go into business, that make business more profitable, right? So it's leading people to that versus necessarily creating them as a whole person that's capable of providing for themselves. They're creating people that are reliant on other systems for their well-being and for their provision. I know too many people that feel that they're victims because they don't feel that they have control over the ability to provide for their own basic needs: food, clothing, shelter. I mean, if we were to teach children at a young age how to garden and grow their own food, how to prepare that food so that it is prepared in a healthy way, how to make their own clothes if they ever had to, they would know that they could always have clothing because they could make it themselves. How to build a shelter, how to protect themselves from the elements. Fundamental skills that if they're able to do that, then they're no longer relying on other systems to provide that. Now they become an independent, right? They become a self-sustaining resource that is no longer able to be controlled or become a victim of or be taken advantage of the systems that they're now relying on to provide that. We've even outsourced the raising of children. Sorry, but that's exactly what's happened. We outsourced them to public schools, private schools, whatever schools. And at that point, who is to blame for how these children turn out? Right? So anyway, I think it's really important. And how am I going to know that child actually was given a very special gift of being able to grow things? And that's the path that they probably should pursue. Or maybe they are a wonderful cook and they didn't realize it because they were never taught how to cook and you never had the opportunity to see that skill come out. A lot of times those skills don't come out until later in their experience, and it's by accident or by chance that they do. It certainly wasn't something that was being mined by the system to bring out in a natural way. I think work is that way. I also think the work systems are that way. I think a lot of times we put people in positions that they're not best suited for. And then we expect them to learn how to do it. I tell people all the time, well, that'd be like me taking someone who writes with their right hand and they're right-handed and asking them to work and write with their left hand all the time. I'm put them in the wrong position. I've put them in a position, they can do it, but they're not going to be great at it and they're going to be very uncomfortable doing it. Will they grow and develop? Yes, but they'll still never be in that state of flow and be as productive if I put them in a position where they can use their natural ability and it's flowing. Communities are that way. I think we find people, we don't take advantage within our own community of the talent and the skills and abilities that are already there. And we go seeking help outside of the community when in reality, all the answers to the community are right within it. So again, this is, it's funny to me that we started this conversation with probably less general preparation, and it's ended up being probably one of the more robust conversations that we've had. So I'm going to end with this one question, and that is, what gives you hope about the future?
I think what gives me hope is my son, right? I brought him up a great deal, and it makes me emotional as I even say it because I see the changes in him and in his generation, right? I think every generation has its own sort of karmic lot and limitations based in what it's been given from those previous. And so what gives me hope is that systems are changing, that the shadow is coming to light, right? That things are less hidden, and that these newer generations are speaking up. They are finding a deepened sense of connection to who they are, and not just looking outward to be told who they are, right? There is more individuation, and I have to have hope, right? Not the kind of hope that's built in false awareness or something that's so far beyond us. But I think that because of the patterns I've broken, because of the way I live, because I see the benefit of that in my son, I have to have hope that things will continue to change, that that which is unsustainable is dissolving because it was built in faulty foundation to begin with. And so we have patience with the destruction that's happening, but destruction is necessary for creation. And so even when things are tough, even when it appears that everything is being destroyed and there's, all these fires to put out, so to speak, around us, those fires give me hope because I understand that destructive element is so important for this next generation to continue to create from our ashes.
That's part of the alchemical process that I think the world is going through.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm going to agree with everything that you've said. And also just add that this podcast gives me hope that this awakening concept gives me hope, that other podcasts like this give me hope, that the number of people that are awakening right now give me hope, that my own awakening process gives me hope, that I feel it myself. All of this is a beautiful thing, and the feeling that I have, we're all raising our vibrational level. We're all lighting our own candle and our own flame and passing it to others, and all of this gives me hope.
Well said. I'm confident, in spite of what many people think about our younger generation, that they have chosen to come here to lead this transformation and awakening and the creation of heaven on earth, the new earth, that I believe we are here to help and to facilitate. We're here to be, to me, we are here to be facilitators with them of that transformation. And as we bring this conversation to a close, I think it's important to note that maybe the big question here is not who is responsible for fixing the world. Maybe the real question is, what am I creating as a creator through the way I live? What am I creating? How am I contributing to the collective through my individual creation? Because all the systems we've been talking about are built from choices that we make. Choices are built from beliefs, and beliefs come from consciousness. And as we awaken, as we create changes, I think it's important for us to focus on, the foundations of love, of unity, of love, and that if we do that, we truly will create heaven on earth. So, Purna, Joe, thank you so much for, again, being a part of this wonderful conversation this morning. And I hope that everyone out there who's listening, rebuilding with love does not begin someday. It begins in every single choice that we make, that you make. Every relationship, every space where we choose unity and love over fear and separation, that is going to change the world. And with that thought, the space between continues.
As we come to a close, remember that this journey continues in many expressions. This podcast is part of a family of partner podcasts. Awakening Heaven on Earth. The space between heaven and earth and Living Heaven on Earth are 3 companion podcasts exploring spiritual awakening from complementary perspectives. Awakening Heaven on Earth offers the core teachings and mystical reflections on unity, love, and conscious living. The space between creates room for dialogue, reflection, and lived conversation around those teachings. Living Heaven on Earth focuses on basic spiritual practices that help embody these insights in daily life. Together, they form a unified journey of understanding, experience, and integration, inviting listeners to remember their connection with the divine, with one another, and with the living world. You can find all of them available on the same podcast streaming platforms wherever you listen. And if music helps carry these teachings deeper into the heart, The Unity. Awakening Heaven on Earth album is available on all major music streaming services as a musical companion to this journey. Wherever you engage, through listening, reflection, conversation, or music, may it gently remind you you are not separate. You belong to the one life. And heaven is already unfolding within you. Until next time, walk gently, love deeply, and embody heaven on earth.